It's a great pleasure for me to be able to do this, but introducing Carl Eckberg to a group that's devoted to the history of St. Genevieve has to be the very Piedmont of superfluity. Carrying coals to Newcastle is the English figure of speech that comes to mind. In parts of France, on dit that someone who does this kind of thing apporte de la farine au meunier. That is, he is bringing flour to the mill. And that's exactly how I feel. But, you know, when I was in graduate school, probably 50 years ago, a friend of mine remarked to me that the history of most of the United States had really not been written. I had no idea what he meant. So I just kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to reveal a very great ignorance. But you know, while it's true that there's always been a very healthy and keen interest in the history of St. Genevieve here, and you're to be congratulated on that. Not a few very good works had been written about the history of St. Genevieve. I think it's right to say that till Carl wrote his most influential book, that came along about 1985, most of us did not know how true my friend's observation had been. My own ignorance, at least, was. Indeed, it was profound, but Carl's 1985 book on St. Genevieve was an absolute revelation, solidly grounded in documents and reliable accounts, broadly conceived to combine international events with detailed descriptions of daily life here, agriculture, social structure, even architecture. A true tour de force, written so both the specialist and the general reader could be brought along. I have two copies of this book. I have the regular one, and I have the deluxe edition with a genuine leatherette binding. And they are both dog-eared and well-worn. The book is a go-to book for me when I need a source to answer certain kinds of questions, and I've never come away empty-handed. It has encouraged all kinds of inquiries into the past of our region and continues to be influential today. I have 9 of Carl's books in my library. Some years he produced 2 books, so obviously I'm not going to be able to say a lot about his complete oeuvre. But I'm going to offer a couple of observations, and they will have to suffice. His book, French Roots in the Illinois Country, completely reconstructed our understanding of the French occupation of the region. But it revealed more than that, for it showed an author deeply acquainted with 18th century French culture in general, and in particular with its mindset, what Carl likes to call this mentalité, a word that only works really well in French. Carl's biographies tell us even more about the man. Carl rarely stops to philosophize, but his willingness to tell individual stories lets slip that he has not completely discarded the notion of the great man theory of history. Indeed, in his book on Bolduc, I believe it was, he remarked that, quote, the proximity of Antietam battlefield to his residence continues to impress upon him the importance of human will and individual decisions as factors in the historical process. Now, if further proof of this last observation were required, it would be supplied by noting that Carl has a bust of Thomas Jefferson in his front garden. And since every event ought to have a party favor, and to celebrate the new status of the Green Tree Tavern, about which Carl has written, I have devised a party favor for Carl today. Carl is very fond of French wines, as he is of all things French. Now, this particular bottle that I'm about to give him may not, at least at first blush, best please him, because I know for a fact that Carl is not inclined to take champagne seriously. And this bottle, though it comes from France and has bubbles, is not even champagne. It is a humble Crémant de Limoux. But it has a feature that I think will overcome these very formidable barriers. And that is, it's called Thomas Jefferson Crémant de Limoux. Perhaps I should have said Thomas Jefferson. I hope it will at least go some way to indicating the esteem that I have for Carl and that we all have, and my gratitude for his friendship and generosity over the years. Are you here somewhere? Oh, there you go. I'll help you drink it later. Since you don't like it, I know I'll drink it all.
Judge Arnold, a Southern gentleman like Thomas Jefferson, always too generous, especially in his comments about me, Judge. Sharon Person, Sharon's here somewhere. Sharon Person, the judge and I are often exchanging emails about various aspects of Illinois country history. And recently I received an email from the judge which reads this way: the donation clause of the marriage contract does not violate either the spirit or the letter of Article 282 of the Coutume de Paris. This is from the judge. So, Judge, I have a question to pose to you. Do we need to read the first 281 articles in order to understand Article 282?
No, just take my word for it.
These are the kinds of, Sharon, the judge, and I are the only three people in the United States of America who are corresponding about the Coutume de Paris, which in fact, we must say, is essential for understanding colonial St. Genevieve and the Illinois country in general. So this is Paris of the 17th century, which isn't terribly relevant to us, but the Bolduc or the Bolduc family came from the left bank on the Rue Saint-Jacques. So this is oriented to the east, and so the left bank is the right bank, okay? This is the right bank, this is the left bank, the Latin Quarter, and this is the Rue Saint-Jacques over here, heading south from the island where Notre Dame is. There's kind of a nice irony here because this is, of course, the University Quarter, the learned section of the French capital, and Louis Bolduc, as we all know, was illiterate. But his family came from the university section of the French capital. So let's move fairly quickly here. The origin of Louis Bolduc's life in the Illinois country really starts back here in Canada, in the village of San Joachim, which was attacked by the British. When I'm away from the mic, can you hear me? Do I need to be at the mic? Yeah. In any case, we're not entirely sure why the Brits, as they came up the St. Lawrence Estuary in 1759, why they targeted that town of San Joachim. But they did target it. And against the instructions of the bishop in Quebec City, the parish priest there actually led the defense of his village. The priest himself was killed, and they said that he was also scalped by the British troops. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but about a half a dozen, 6 or 8 of his fellow villagers were killed, and we think, I mean, it's a fair assumption that it was this occasion during the French and Indian War that led Louis Bolduc to come south out of New France into Louisiana. Please, thank you. Yeah, once again, this is a map showing, yeah, you can see the villages that were targeted by the Brits, and when they were targeted, the villages were burned and the parish churches were burned. We sometimes forget that the French and Indian War was to some extent a religious war. And these Protestants who were invading French Canada, especially the New Englanders. The New Englanders really, really hated Roman Catholics. And it's quite possible that there were American troops with the British contingent that burnt Louis Bolduc's village in 1759. So here are the foundations of that church are preserved in the village. That is to say, this was the church that was burnt by these are the foundations of the church that was burnt by the Brits in 1759. This would have been the church in which Louis Bolduc was baptized. Through a glitch, somehow, through a glitch in the parish records, there is no baptismal record for Louis Bolduc. It's interesting because the records from that parish are pretty complete, but Louis Bolduc is not there. We know from other records especially Bob Mueller knows from other records, Bob being the master of the St. Genevieve parish records. We know about his birth in this village, but there isn't any evidence of his life there. No evidence in Canada of Louis Bolduc's life before he came south into the Illinois country. Okay, so looking at this map, we can see French North America here divided between Louisiana down here, okay, and New France or Canada up here. Very, very sharp distinction between those two. So, New France up here, Louisiana down here. And of course, St. Genevieve is down here in Louisiana, in the Illinois country, which of course was part of Louisiana. By the way, you may stop me at any time to ask questions. I don't mind being interrupted. So let me pause here. Anyone have any questions about what I've said thus far? So we're together on that, right? New Canada, New France, Louisiana, please, Bob. So, as Lewis, which he almost certainly did, came through Lake Erie and took the portage up the Miami River, and then portage over into the Wabash River at what is now Fort Wayne. As he made that transition, he was moving from New France, Nouvelle-France, into Louisiana. And once he did that, he never, ever again set foot in New France. You need to understand that. He became a citizen of the Illinois country, a resident of the Illinois country, which was the northern part of Louisiana. So take a minute to read these words, if you would, please. This is a really, really unfortunate website that's been posted recently on behalf of the Colonial Dames. I can't imagine who's responsible for this.
Carl.
It's appalling.
Yes,
Yes,
please.
please.
Just read it, we can't read
That's
it.
what we're going to see it back. So we'll just read it for us.
Can't read it.
Welcome to the Bolduc House Museum and the Center for French Colonial Life, owned by the National Society of the Colonial Dames, if America. You know, this was never even copied. You know, no one looked at it before they slapped it on the internet, and it's out there misleading people as we speak. If America in the state of Missouri and managed by New France, the other colonial America, blah, blah, blah. New France. Well, this is a completely misleading notion, because St. Genevieve was never a part of New France. And Louis Bolduc, once he made that transition over the Miami portage into Louisiana, and never again set foot. So this turns the history of this region upside down. This is appalling. This website should be taken down immediately if anyone had any sense of responsibility. Please, Bob. Okay, so here we are in the heart of the Illinois country. You can see here the Saline River. You can see the Merrimack up here. Many of you are familiar with this map. There's Fort Sharp, there's Kaskaskia, there's the Saline. And here it says, you can't read it, I guess it says French village established 3 years ago. And this map dates from 1755. And so that places the origin of St. Genevieve in 1752, doesn't it? It's actually, I mean, this cartographer was working in Paris, Jacques-Nicolas Belin, the best of the mid-18th century French cartographer. And he may have been wrong on this. I think there were people living here in St. Genevieve in 1750, probably. But it's around that time. It's mid-18th century. That's fine. So here is a map by a British officer showing the old town of St. Genevieve down close to the river, and you'll notice that it's in an elongated, it was a string town with principally one street, La Grande Rue, with cross streets which didn't have names, but that's our earliest illustration of the configuration of the old town of St. Genevieve. and that is the town. Now, Bob is the master of these parish records in St. Genevieve, and this happens to be a real gem from 1765. I want to make sure we agree on this, Bob. This is the earliest known document to establish that an individual named Louis Bolduc even existed.
Because the only thing we have are the church records
Right,
and the archives,
right.
and it doesn't show up earlier in the
Right.
archives.
So this is an extraordinarily important
What's the
document.
date?
1765, and it's his marriage to this very important person who's totally forgotten, Agathe Gaufreau, who was from a French-Canadian family from Kaskaskia originally, and their marriage in 1765, a hugely important event. Now also notice that the priest who's officiating here is this remarkable character, Louis Sebastien Murin, M-U-R-I-N, who was all over the place. Sharon has studied him a lot because he did the first baptisms in St. Louis, but he was all over the place. He was in Kaskaskia, he was in St. Genevieve, he was in Vincennes, he was just all over the place. He's one of those, huh?
He was in Arkansas.
He was in Arkansas. Wow, I'd never heard of it. Sharon, did you know that? I was in Arkansas?
I learned that from the judge.
In any case, he's one of those absolutely astonishing Jesuits. I mean, you got to admire these guys. I've often wondered why people at St. Louis University show no interest in these people. I mean, this guy's a really, really remarkable man. Notice how he signs his name. He calls himself Prêtre Missionnaire. Keep it in mind, this is 1765, and the Jesuits no longer existed in French North America. They had been suppressed in 1763 by the government of Louis XV, and Murin went to New Orleans with the rest of the Jesuits, but then he came back, not as a Jesuit. You see, in 1760, he always signed his name S.J., Society of Jesus. But now he's signing his name as Prêtre Missionnaire. But I think, Jim, is he buried in St. Louis?
Yes.
In Florissant, maybe. Is it in Florissant or St. Louis?
He was moved to Calvary. Yeah.
A remarkable guy. In any case, he was really very close to the Bolduc family. So he officiates at his wedding in 1765. We come back to the judge and the coutume de Paris, the customary law of Paris. This was the traditional French legal code that governed domestic life in northern France, especially in Paris, and in all overseas French colonies. And so it was under the regime of this law, including Articles 281 and 282, the one the judge cited, that governed the marriage of Louis Bolduc and Agathe Gaufreau starting in 1765. And so once again, we see Murin once again here with Prêtre Missionnaire, and this is the baptism of their first child. Once again, I would defer to Bob on this because he knows these records. So baptism was of Elizabeth, daughter of Louis Bolduc and Agathe Gaufreau. And this then is the baptism of their next child, Louis, son of Louis Bolduc and Agathe Gaufreau. So they're establishing their family. Does anyone have any questions on these? I hate to keep on saying this, but Bob is the master of these documents, and they are extraordinarily precious documents. Aren't they, Bob? Yes, they are. Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
I'll just say they go back to 1759.
They go back to 1759. I'd forgotten that. Did St. Genevieve become an official canonical parish at that time?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Before that, it was a missionary church. Huh? So this is the militia muster roll of 1766, done by one of our favorite persons, Philippe Rastel de Rocheblave, a French aristocrat, very prickly guy. didn't last too long as commandant, but he drafted this militia muster roll 1766, and Bolduc appears right here. It is of some importance to note, and I do want to make this case, that at this time in his life in St. Genevieve, Louis Bolduc was not a significant character. And one of the evidences for this is that he is not in the officer ranks in the St. Genevieve militia in 1766. This is a fascinating document. It's one of those documents that comes from Seville, Spain, which are so important to the history of St. Genevieve in the Illinois country in Louisiana. And this then is the 1766 census of St. Genevieve, done as a Spanish census, and Bolduc is here, you see him? There's Bolduc, got it spelled almost correct. And in this case, one of the things that we're interested in is the issue of slaves. Bolduc eventually has quite a number of slaves, but once again in 1766, no slaves. No slaves. So once again, the number of slaves you had is to some extent a measure of economic and social status. In 1766, Louis Bolduc was not part of the power elite in St. Genevieve, for sure. He then did acquire 2 slaves, and this is the marriage record of 2 of his slaves. And it's interesting that the woman involved is named after Louis Bolduc's wife, Agathe. So this is, what do we have for, what's the date here? This is 1770. We wanted to eventually come to that date, 1770. So by 1770, Louis Bolduc is, in fact, has a social status which is rising. And some evidence of that is that he has a slave couple, and he was, this is important, I think, and Bob knows this too, for sure. Louis Bolduc was very attached to his parish, and he served for many, many, many years as a marguier of the parish of St. Genevieve, that is to say, as a church warden. And so there would be no doubt that when Louis Bolduc has a slave couple, he is going to make sure that that couple is married in the church. No doubt about that. Everyone didn't do that. A lot of these French guys and women did see that their slaves were baptized and married, but not all. But there's no question that Bolduc would do that. And so here is the law governing slavery in French North America, the famous Code Noir. It was originally published in 1724 for Louisiana. There had been an earlier code for the French Antilles, for the Caribbean islands, but in 1724 it was revised slightly and republished. It says here, at Versailles, an edict of the king emanating from Versailles, 1724, establishing the black code for Louisiana, of course, including the Illinois country. And so it would be under this set of law codes that Louis Bolduc and his wife would be managing their increasing slave population.
Carl, did the Spanish government endorse that code directly, or did they just by habit?
I may have to defer to the judge on that. There's a lot of dispute about this, whether they did or not. My take on it is yes, because there was a case in the 1770s when St. Genevieve was part of the Spanish regime of Francois Vallée actually adducing the black code in a legal case. So my take on it is yes, but I think there's some diversity of opinion on this.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Yeah, that did the Spanish regime endorse the French black code?
Yes.
Yes. There we have it. That is a judgment.
Maybe an appeal for that judgment.
A petition or appeal? Okay, let's move on here, huh? Please, Bob. Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, we can't, I was gonna go through this blow by blow. This is one of the most interesting legal cases in the history of colonial St. Genevieve. And in this single manuscript page, you can find out everything about St. Genevieve at that time. It's an absolutely astonishing document. And so, even though you can't read it where you are, nonetheless, let me go through it and explain how this tells us everything about St. Genevieve. About the personalities, about the politics, about the government, about the military, about the economics, about the social order. Everything is included, even about relations between husband and wife. Everything is in this document. So it starts out, Louis Bolduc says, I am Louis Bolduc, and I have left my mark on this document. That is to say, he's acknowledging that he's illiterate. Okay, I've left my mark in this document. And then what happened is that a soldier in the garrison named Malvo, a Spanish soldier with a French name, it must have meant that he'd been recruited perhaps in New Orleans. He was a French Creole serving in the Spanish army, and that he had come to Louis Bolduc asking for the 200 pounds of flour that Louis Bolduc owed him. So Bolduc is involved in commercial activities with members of the Spanish garrison in St. Genevieve in 1770. And Bolduc says, I'm sorry, I don't have the 200 pounds of flour right at this point. And so Malvo responds, why don't you give me some tafia in lieu of the flour? Tafia was that ubiquitous, very highly alcoholic rum that was brought into Louisiana from the Caribbean islands. And it's all over the place. I mean, every day that you look at French documents from this era, you're going to run into tafia. I mean, it's all over the place. And so they strike a deal. A deal that I don't fully understand, but the gist of it was that Bolduc would provide him with 6 bottles of tafia in exchange for the 200 pounds of flour. Does that sound right? Okay, now there's a question here. Sharon, you got the sharp eyes on this stuff. Is this an abbreviation for barrique or bouteille? He never spells it out. And a barrique would be a small cask, as opposed to a bouteille. I think it's bouteille, which reveals that Louis Bolduc is a pretty sharp trader. These Spanish soldiers wanted some booze. If you don't have my flour, give us some tafia. So he gave him 3 bottles and decided that he would owe him 3 more. But only 6 bottles for 200 pounds of flour? Sounds like a tough trade to me. In any case, that was the nature of the thing. Now, Bolduc also claims in here that he did not know that the commandant of St. Genevieve, a guy named Louis Villard, a French Creole from the New Orleans area, who eventually married the daughter of Francois Vallée, but he was a fresh Spanish officer in 1770, and he had officially prohibited the sale by anyone of liquor to his soldiers. And Bolduc claims in this is a deposition, and Bolduc says, I did not know about that prohibition when I traded the 6 bottles of tafia for the 200 pounds of flour. Okay, then what happens is that 2 of the Spanish garrison, including Malvo, get incredibly plastic. Get thrown in, he calls it a prison. I don't know what kind of a prison there was in St. Genevieve in 1770. That must have been a pretty miserable place. In any case, It's a one-room prison. And Louis Bolduc also gets thrown into the prison. Not because he was outrageously drunk, but because he had provided the booze against the prohibition established by Louis Villard, the commandant. Is this too complicated? So the three of them are in prison together under the orders of Louis Villard, who was a lieutenant in the Spanish army as a French Creole and who was commandant in St. Genevieve. Okay, now complicating it is that the real power in St. Genevieve wasn't with the commandant Louis Villard. Guess who held the real power? Francois Valet. I mean, Louis Villard would not have walked his dog without permission from Francois Valet. No, really, seriously. Francois Valet is captain of the militia. Louis Villard is only a lieutenant in the Spanish army. Okay, so Bolduc overhears these drunken Spanish soldiers, both of whom may have been French Creoles to complicate things, conspiring to break out of prison. And he says, he claims in this deposition that he tried to dissuade them. Don't do that. This is going to be a bad thing for everyone if you try to break out of prison. But they kept on saying, you know, we're going to go for it. We're getting out of here. The judge was commenting yesterday about the miserable condition of members of the Spanish army in Louisiana at this time. In any case, he cannot dissuade them. This is what Louis Bolduc is saying, okay? So what he does is he sends word to bring his wife to the window of the jail. Agathe Gauvreau. He sends for his wife. He is going to chercher ma femme. Agathe Gauvreau. Now, how he got word to her, slaves often functioned as messengers in St. Genevieve at this time, and my guess it was a slave of Bolduc who functioned as messenger to bring his wife to the jail. And so Agathe Gauvreau comes to the jail, and Louis Bolduc says, please go and fetch Monsieur Valet. You know, keep it in mind that Agathe Gauvreau is really of Canadian extraction, Louis Bolduc is Canadian, and Francois Valet is Canadian. And the other side, so to speak, are Creoles. So there's also a little tension here between the Creole commandant, Louis Villard, and the French-Canadian captain of the militia, Francois Valet. In any case, Valet arrives at the prison and immediately springs Louis Bolduc and gets the whole thing wrapped up nice and neat. And there's no evidence that he even bothered to talk to Louis Villard about it. He just stepped in and resolved the issue, you know. We don't know what happened to the two drunk soldiers. Valet was not a vindictive man of any kind. He probably went easy on the drunk soldiers as well. But he got Louis out. So here we have these Canadians conspiring in a certain sense. Francois Valet, Louis Bolduc, and Agathe Gauvreau. And they don't care about the Spanish commandant who's a Creole from New Orleans. Now, eventually that tension is resolved when Louis Villard marries Francois Valet's daughter, a marriage of a Creole and a French Canadian, and that gets it resolved. So there's everything in this one page. Everything, it's about the economy, about politics, about the military. This is the first solid evidence we have. A year earlier, there had been no Spanish garrison in St. Genevieve. So this is the first really solid evidence we have that in 1770, a Spanish garrison comes into St. Genevieve. And after Louis Villard, it's Carcabona, isn't it, who's involved in the 1780 thing. So beginning in 1770 and right on down to the Louisiana Purchase, a Spanish garrison is posted in St. Genevieve, usually renting a barracks from the Valet family. They were making a little bit of money on that. So here's a case where we have this single document that is incredibly revealing. I mean, you could almost write a book based on this one single source material. So like the parish records, Bob, gosh, some of these single documents, you know, they just take your breath away. Thank you.
Sorry, Carl, was that 1770?
1770, correct. Here's the only occasion I know that it says son's marriage. Here's Louis Bolduc Jr. He signs his name. Here is Louis Bolduc Sr. It's the only time that I have seen that he actually struggled to scrawl out his name. So that scrawling right in the center there, this Bolduc, here's the old man, Louis. This is 1797, and here is his, there's baby valet. Here's Louis Bolduc Jr., and here's the woman he's marrying, Marie Louise Saint-Jean. I guess that would be Saint-Jean Beauvais, Jim, huh? Would it be? Not necessarily. I haven't looked into that, frankly. Okay, Bob. Yeah. Okay, here's once again, I come back to Bob. This is, maybe I should let Bob talk about it. This is a portion of the St. Genevieve militia muster roll from the time of the battle at St. Louis in 1780. And I was, Bob is really working intensely on this document. I was looking to see if Louis Bolduc was with the St. Genevieve militia in St. Louis in the summer of 1780. Kind of important, you know, was Louis Bolduc there or not? And so I found this name, or did I? Yeah, here is a Louis, it looks like Louis Bolduc. Louise, B-O-L-O, and I thought, gee, is this a garbled form of Bolduc? Because I don't know any other name with that kind of general configuration. Bob says it's not true. Not true.
Well,
So,
you know, in the 1779, there was
Right.
Louis Bolduc.
Right.
In November, there was a Louis Ledoux.
right,
And
yeah,
that's why I think this is Louis Ledoux.
yeah,
As you point out in your book, when Francois Valley sent the guys up to St. Louis, he didn't send the well-to-do.
Right.
Because it was planting season. And in
Right.
1779, Bolduc's listed as a habitant and marchand.
yeah.
So he's.
This is just a glimpse of this record. Bob was really intensely studying these militia muster rolls, which are very, very revealing of what was going on in both St. Louis and St. Genevieve. In any case, I may be generalizing too glibly here, but Louis Bolduc seems to have been a parish guy rather than a militia guy. He was a marquier, a church warden, year after year after year, but he was never an officer in the militia. And for a guy of his status, and he's developing status all the time, by the way. From the time he arrives, and we don't know what resources he had, but probably not very many. He's constantly moving up in the social economic order of things. So here is his family on the 1787 census. Louis Bolduc. This is his second wife, of course. His first wife died. I got to go vote. I died in 1775. Here are his two sons. Elizabeth's not there because Elizabeth had already married off before 1787. So his firstborn, Elizabeth, isn't here. But it's interesting that he has the nephew of his first wife living in his household. Henry Enrique Gauvreau. The Spanish spelling of the French-Canadian name Gauvreau is a little messed up here, but that's clearly the nephew of his first wife. So extended families, kind of standard operating procedure in St. Genevieve at that time.
Carl, is that the nephew that drowned on a trip to New Orleans?
Oh, boy.
Was his wife's nephew rather than his?
I can't answer that question. That would be interesting to know, but I can't answer the question.
So what was the name of his wife on that census?
Marie.
What was her maiden name?
It was Courtois, I think.
Oh,
Marie Courtois. Okay, so here is the early 1790s in the St. Genevieve area. You can see the serpent there, the Mississippi River. You can see the decaying old town here, called the Old Village, the former village. You can see the new town here, where Bolduc had just built his house in 1793. And you can see Nouvelle-Bourbon, the settlement created by the French aristocrat de la Sousse de Lousière, who's buried with his wife in the cemetery here, but we don't know where. It's kind of interesting. We have this French, kind of a high-ranking French aristocrat and his wife in the local cemetery, but we don't know where they're buried, but that's true. In any case, in 1793, de la Sousse de Lousière was building a house in New Bourbon, close to New Bourbon, and he had hired white laborers. He had his own slaves as carpenters, and he also then borrowed slaves from the Valet brothers to expedite the building project. So there are 3 different groups of carpenters working on de la Sousse de Lousière's house in 1793. And I think something similar occurred with this house, the Louis Bolduc house of the 1790s. That is to say, everyone has recognized for a long time that there are basically 2 components to this house that are structurally a little bit different. And so there has been a lot of noise recently that the one part of the house was built in 1788. Believe me, folks, that is utter rubbish. That is nonsense. It was not built in 1788. The difference in the construction is because there were probably 2 or 3 different carpenter crews working on the house at that time. In any case, when Louis Bolduc moves into this house, circa 1793, living next door to the Valets, he has arrived for sure. We don't know that until this happened. We don't know until the new town develops and he builds this house that he has really officially risen into the power elite in St. Genevieve. But this house from the early 1790s, and we all know what a magnificent structure it is, this is emblematic of his arrival into the power elite in St. Genevieve. I was supposed to stop in 1770. I've gone now to 1793, and so thank you very much. I'd be happy to try to. Please.
We keep hearing whispers and comments about Louis Bolduc having had a first wife and son.
Absolute, total rubbish. I don't know what gives with the colonial dames. It's like they have a gremlin living in the attic of the Lincoln house. And every year that gremlin says, I wonder what kind of crazy stuff I can pull out this year. That was their story last year. Now they got the story about 1788 date on the house. They're just goofy, I helped them out last year, but they seem to be beyond help,
Did you say that the name of the nobleman that lived in New Bourbon was de la Sousse de Lousière?
Yes.
Was he any relation? There was a captain or a commandant in St. Louis.
No. Oh, no, yeah, no, he was his son.
Oh, okay.
That was his son, sure. I mean, in 1804.
Okay.
Yeah, that was his son, for sure.
The captain was
Yes.
nobleman's son?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It was the real deal. It was the real deal. Any other questions? I just opened a can of worms.
How come there walls in the cemetery, so there were no tombs? They didn't really have stones.
Who knows about the cemetery? John, do you know what why are the graves of de la Sousse de Lousière and his wife gone?
We would love to know.
Wouldn't that be a great excavation? Oh, God.
There's between 3,500 and 5,000 people buried in that.
1806, I think it was when they died.
The problem is they didn't designate where people were buried. 3,500 comes from the church records. Protestants were buried there, Native Americans, slaves.
Thank you. Appreciate it.